Today on the Relationship Revival Show, I'm joined by guest Danielle Golan. Danielle is the owner of a California-based group practice called The Feeling Space. Danielle primarily works with the LGBTQIA plus community, poly and E&M couples and individuals, and creatives and executives in the film industry. Danielle is trained in EMDR and brain spotting and specializes in anxiety, trauma, and relationship issues. You're listening to the Relationship Revival Podcast with John DeBach, also known as Mr. Spirituality. That's me. I'm your host, giving you insights and guidance from over 10 years in the field of this amazing journey we call romance. On this show, I go over everything you need to know about how to get into a relationship, how to get the most out of a relationship, and sometimes even how to gracefully end a relationship without pulling your hair out and going crazy. And occasionally, I'm even joined by new and old friends who are also relationship experts to bring you guidance and wisdom with new perspectives. Thanks for stopping by. So we're talking to Danielle Golan, and Danielle is a therapist who works in California and also in Florida. You're 100% virtual. Were you 100% virtual because of COVID, or kind of was that your intention going into it? What, I mean, you know, that's the typical story. How did it happen for you?
I mean, I started my practice literally March 2020, and I, was working with someone who had an office, and I was in and out of the office, for the first few weeks. And then as COVID happened, everything shut down. And I would come in to see like little kids with like, a double mask on, 6 feet distance and stuff like that. And then throughout time, I was like, honestly, I love virtual. I love just being at home. I love, going to yoga and then hopping into a session and then, doing my own thing. And then eventually I started traveling while being a therapist. So I, did Europe for a few months. I currently live in New York. I did, the West Coast, just traveling up and down and all virtual. So it was pretty cool.
Do you find that it presents any challenges for you when working with people?
Being all virtual?
Yeah, virtual versus
I think
being
that's
in
a great
person.
question. I personally think that it's more intimate because I'm in someone's home with them. I'm in their safe space. I usually see like, some clients in their pajamas or some clients in bed, with a blanket, and they just feel really cozy and comfortable, as opposed to, I know in the past, like clients would drive in LA traffic, trying to make it to the session. They'd be a few minutes late. They're huffing and puffing, going up the stairs, and then they sit down and they're like, and I'm like, okay, let's decompress for a few minutes, So
yeah. So really, no is the answer. It's more beneficial than
I
anything.
personally, I love it, and honestly, COVID was a odd, horrible blessing in disguise. So yeah.
Very cool. Well, so I wanted to talk to you for a couple reasons. So most of the people I work with, I think a lot of therapists and counselors or coaches attract people who have some kind of similarities to themselves or whatever. I'm not sure exactly how it ends up happening, but just so happens that most of the population I deal with are kind of cisgender, heteronormative. They're dealing with the kind of classic family structure of either being a new couple or having kids. And it's just kind of been what I've dealt with for over 10 years. And occasionally I'll get a client who is in the LGBTQIA plus community or is kind of in this new polyamory world. That is, I mean, it's not really new, but it's kind of, a little bit more exposed than it used to be. And I'm happy to work with them, but there are differences. And so I end up usually referring out because I feel like if you want someone who has a specialty in something, it's better to be with the best person as opposed to just someone you picked off at random or you think you want. So I part of the goal with this show is for me to learn personally and kind of be able to advise people and also to educate people. So there are definitely a lot of people in that cisgender heteronormative world that have no idea what it's like, what additional challenges, if any, there are in those two communities. And since you have specialties in those, I'd love to kind of explore your thoughts on, what are the differences? Are there differences in approach? And what are some challenges and all that kind of stuff? So I don't know exactly where to begin. What's your kind of initial thoughts on, how do you jump into that world if it's totally new for you?
Yeah, totally. I think for everyone, it's completely different. For the majority of the people that I see in my practice, it's one of the partners actually want to explore their sexuality or their gender identity, and they're unable to do so within the confines of their current relationship. So they end up, asking their partners, having deep discussions, coming to sessions with me to discuss opening up the marriage or opening up the relationship in order to explore their sexuality in that way. So what I usually do is kind of talk about each person's wants and needs from an imago theory perspective, and I can kind of get into that too. And then from there, we move on to sort of creating a contract together, a really firm foundation. Okay, like if I'm going to open up this marriage, what is it going to look like? Can I bring this person home to our home? Let's say we have kids or whatever. Can I bring this person to our home? Can I not? Is it going to be really secretive? Do you not want to know anything about my other relationship? Like, are we gonna swing? Are we going to include other people? Are we going to create a pod? There's so many different ways to go about this. But the things that I see primarily are either, couples in crisis, as I'm sure you see as well too, couples in crisis that they've already opened up the marriage or the relationship and things are going downhill because they haven't created that strong foundation and structure. Or I see couples who are like looking to open it up and they're like trying to explore how to do that as well too.
When people come into a session with you and one person wants to open it up and the other person has hesitation where they say, I don't know if I'll ever be comfortable with it, what's the way you can start unpacking that? Because I feel like that happens quite a bit, even in my own practice, where someone says, I want to open it up. And it's a tricky kind of process to work through.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It really depends on the person. We go into background. I always go into the background of the clients, see how they met, what attracted them to one another, things like that. And then asking them why they want to open up the relationship or the marriage. And then asking each individual partner what that means to them. Like for some, they're like, oh, you want to open up the marriage? Like that's infidelity. You're cheating on me. I don't like that. So then we discuss, smaller things. What defines cheating in your book? Starting from there. What defines, like is kissing cheating? Is sex cheating? Is just emotional relationships cheating? So then we start from there. But it is really difficult. I'm trying to think like with other clients how I've sort of navigated that. I think it's just deeper discussions and coming to a negotiation. I always talk about negotiation in my couple sessions. Like, okay, like if you don't want to open up, then where are we going to go with this relationship? What are you both comfortable with and how are we going to continue on kind of thing? Yeah.
So do you find that you act as a mediator in those negotiations, or is it more teaching them how to negotiate with each other?
So I'm definitely the mediator, and then I help them negotiate. I help them see that they have two contrasting views on something and helping them kind of come together, almost like they're on two extremes, and helping them sort of like inch together to find a middle ground. And sometimes they don't find a middle ground. I'm sure, again, that you've experienced this, that a lot of couples come in crisis and they're on the verge of divorce, or they're on the verge of breaking up, and they kind of put everything on the therapist. They're like, okay, save our marriage, save this relationship. And it's just like, no, you guys should have came in, 2 years ago when you were having these issues. I can't save your marriage. I can't save your relationship. You're coming in to see if things can work out in the end, if that makes sense.
Sure. Absolutely. When you say, the reasons people want to explore opening the relationship, do you have kind of a top 5 reason list of why they want to open it up? Because for someone who's in a committed marriage, the only reason in their mind often, because I've had these conversations with clients where they're like, I don't understand that world, and it's like, okay, because in a heteronormative kind of classic monogamous relationship, the idea of opening it up, you're right, is especially if it goes, just kind of make it black and white as sex is like the classic benchmark of that's considered cheating. Is it just about the sex for these people when they come to you? And if not, explain that emotional journey so that people who aren't there in their own heart or their head can understand and maybe have some empathy of what's missing in the marriage or in their lives.
So for majority of the people that I see, it's actually not just purely sexual. It could also be emotional as well too. I always, like, like I mentioned earlier, I take it back to the wants and needs. Let's say I'm in a heterosexual relationship with a man and I have a certain fetish that, I want to explore. Or let's say I'm in the BDSM community and like I really want to explore this part of myself. So I'll bring it to my partner and I'll be like, "Hey, I really want to explore this." And he's just like, "No, not for me. Don't like this, not going to do it." So then we discuss opening up the relationship. And then I go ahead and explore that with other people. I explore that side of myself with other people. So I don't suppress it. And then what ends up happening in return is that I come to my partner and the relationship feels a lot closer because I'm getting my needs met elsewhere. I'm getting, certain needs met from this partner and I'm getting my needs met from somewhere else, if that makes sense. So as you mentioned, like the top 5 sort of things, the top 5 is usually exploring, sexual identity / gender identity, exploring fetishes. A lot of times it's people who just had a baby, and they're not feeling comfortable sexually, things like that. So they open it up, like their husbands want to explore sexually because they're not receiving it in the home. They'll open it up like that. Another reason is they just want to see, like they're kind of, been in a relationship for 25 years. They're the only people that they've ever seen, and they just want to explore that. For some people, it's also a turn on. Like they want to hear about their partner going somewhere else and having sex and listening to all the details, and that turns them on. And then they come home and then they feel super aroused by that as well too. And it brings the couple closer together. So there's so many different reasons as to why people open up a relationship or a marriage.
And what I'm hearing there is, in an ideal situation, this is a way where the two can come together even more, where they can bond even deeper when it's done in a consensual way with like clear understanding and people not kind of, taking advantage of a situation.
Of course. Like yeah. And I've seen people come so much closer together, like having this experience, because they also learn how to communicate with one another. They learn how to set boundaries. They learn how to debrief after sex. Like, let's say, they have a sexual experience and they get to talk about it, like, and they never did that before. Yeah. So I think it usually does bring couples together, but I will say that doesn't happen always. It's difficult stuff. It's really difficult, maintaining your primary relationship and then opening it up. And of course, jealousy can come in, but then you bring that into therapy and you discuss the jealousy that's coming up. It's an experiment with one another.
And how do you approach jealousy? Because that is something that probably comes up more often than not.
Yeah. So let's say, a husband and wife come to therapy, and the husband says, like, I don't want to hear about what you're doing out there. Okay. So the wife, doesn't disclose. And then, the husband is brewing with jealousy. So he brings it into the session and we kind of break it down. Why are you feeling this jealousy? What's coming up for you? How can we change the initial agreement that we made so this sort of softens things, so you feel more comfortable in this sort of dynamic, and we kind of just like tweak it and see if that helps. And then let's say she goes out next time and now she tells him, "Hey, like I went on a date with this person and this is where we're going and this is what we did." And then it alleviates that tension. He's just like, "Wow, I feel so much better. Thanks for telling me." So it depends on the person. It depends on the couple. Yeah.
And are you seeing this happen more often now? I mean, obviously your practice is expanding. You're opening a group practice, so obviously it's expanding. Why do you think the culture and society is kind of more open-minded to this stuff now than it has been in the past?
Wow. I think because people are done, staying in the confines of societal sort of boundaries. I think they want to explore themselves. I think, things have been taboo for so long. People are kind of breaking against, societal constructs. And I also think a really fun additive thing is social media. Like all of these things that were really underground and very hush hush, people are talking about them openly, and people are discussing them, and it's on your quote unquote TikTok, like For You page. And then you meet people through social media. So it's definitely like, it's always been there, but now it's more discussed. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So there's just more opportunity, more access. And so that's kind of sparking people's curiosity and giving them courage to try things. Is that kind of what you're
Definitely.
saying?
Yeah. And I think people are just, like, even with sexual identity, people are like, my whole life I was so scared to come out because society didn't accept, the LGBTQIA plus community. But now that there's such an acceptance or a growing acceptance, I feel so much more comfortable expressing myself in this way, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What has it happened where someone, I'm sure it has, but have you dealt with it, I should say, where someone goes out, experiments, and it ends up very
Mm.
badly for them, and they come back and have to kind of deal and unpack that in therapy? And what can you kind of go through what a situation like that looks like and how it might affect the
Totally.
relationship?
So I've seen cases where the couple hasn't created that foundation, has not discussed it almost ad nauseum, and they go out and it's step by step. So let's say they're on Field or they're on Thrinder or whatever, like one of these apps, and they don't tell their partner, even from that position. They don't tell their partner that they're on these apps. They don't share with the people on these apps that they are in an open relationship or an open marriage. And then they go ahead and explore and they go on these dates and they do all of these things, and none of the foundation is there. Then it's infidelity. You're cheating on your partner, because you haven't disclosed this. Yes, you're open, but you didn't disclose certain boundaries, and now you're going outside of those sort of like boundaries, right? Or those bounds. And then what tends to happen is just it causes chaos in the relationship. People feel uncomfortable, people feel mistreated, people feel betrayed in the couple. So they have to come back in and we have to kind of like flesh it all out, over a session or 2 or 3 or 5,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what if you have so that's interesting because that talks about the trauma that might happen kind of inside the actual relationship. What I was kind of getting at is, let's say you have someone, let's say the husband wants to go out and explore certain fantasies or certain things that the wife's not comfortable with. And he goes out and he explores them and realizes, oh, this isn't for me. And he has to kind of walk back into the more traditional structure because he's like, I stepped too far. Does that happen? And when that does, is that just kind of reopening the conversation of the contract, or is it slightly different at that point?
Yeah, I mean, that happens all the time. And this is the fun thing as well, too. Like sometimes, I'll be discussing this with couples, and then through the discussion, they realize, like, I'm so in love with you. Like, let's say, I'm seeing a queer couple. They're like, I'm so in love with you. I don't know why I wanted to open up this relationship in the first place. Like, we don't need to do that anymore. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I see that as well, too, because they learn how to communicate. They learn how to build a foundation. They learn what was initially missing in the primary partnership. And then they're like, I don't need to open this up anymore. I'm really receiving all of my needs in this primary relationship or in this relationship here.
And what do you see? Like, so that's interesting. I have everything here that I need. What do people think they're missing in the relationship that they go exploring for?
Yeah, I think it's so many things. For some people it's emotional. Like I'll give you some background. I always bring this up because it's one of my favorite theories. So there is imago theory that's made by Harville Hendrix mm-hmm. and Helen Hunt. And this theory basically, and I'm sure that we fall in love with people who are familiar to us. And let's say I have a wound with my mother or a wound with my father, I will subconsciously fall in love with someone who will present that same wound in me. And I will have to work through that wound in that partnership, right? So let's say my deep want and need is like, I've always wanted to be seen and heard by my mother, right? And I'm in a relationship with someone who doesn't see me, who doesn't hear me. And I'm repeating that same wound. And, I love this person. I have 3 kids with this person and I don't want to leave. So we kind of discuss opening up the marriage so I can receive that want and need from someone else. And it could be a friend. It could be, a lover. It could be whoever, and it could just be that emotional need that I want from that person.
Right. Right. It's so interesting. We've had a couple of imago therapists on, and, it's hard to argue with the efficacy of it because so many people, and I've seen so many people do so such great things with it. I've always had a bit of a question. It's like, to me, it's like, are you, because the core principle is the first 18 months of your life is where that wound is opened, right? And it's like, I don't know if I buy into that, but regardless of whether or not that wound is created there, the practice of imagotherapy is so powerful that, like, I don't really care about the wound. It's just like, I've seen couples, just thrive on it. So like, whether or not that 18 months thing is true, and there's really no way to prove it on a clinical level, but it's still fascinating how effective it is in repairing those deep kind of emotional issues that people have. And you're the first person I've talked to who uses Imago in conjunction with the LGBTQIA plus and polyamory community. Is there a difference in the way you practice it, or is it still just touching on getting to people's wounds, excuse me, kind of getting to those core wounds, addressing those needs, and kind of filling those holes
Yeah,
emotionally?
I mean, so I'm not like fully trained Imago, but like in Imago theory, but I love Imago theory and I utilize it a lot in my work, the foundation of it. So I think it's quite the same. And speaking to the 18-month thing that you were just describing, I don't think I've ever heard of that, but a lot of my clients, like I'll see wounds that happen when they're, 14 and their dad cheats on their mom or something like that. And that wound,
Yeah, no question
exactly.
about
Yeah.
it,
And
for
that
sure.
wound
Yeah.
comes into their relationships and it's super subconscious. I see it all the time. It's like, they don't want to form a commitment with their partner because of that wound that happened in their teenage years. So I don't know if I agree with the 18 months
Yeah.
thing, but yeah.
So I guess it's not just, that's further proof that, like, it's not a prerequisite to practicing some of the things. I mean, if you take it and you just say, well, something happened to me when I was 14, I don't even know if that even qualifies as Imago anymore, because it's like, well, everybody has teenage and childhood
Mm-hmm.
trauma, and it's like, why
Yeah.
is that so specific to Imago? But the way you get over it and the way we treat it is so strong. And do you do some of the Imago, like, couples practice thing where
And
you have them
hold each
sit
other and
facing each
yeah.
other?
Sometimes I'll
Yeah,
definitely do
yeah. Do
that.
that?
Or I'll do like wants and needs
Sure.
list, kind of like what did you want from your mom? What did you want from your dad? Kind of thing. We have them write them down and read them to one another and ask if those needs are being met, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point. It's that's all good exercises, all fantastic to do. You also have kind of a subspecialty, or maybe just a client population that you work with in the film and TV
Yeah, that's
industry. Is that
true.
right?
Yeah.
And are there challenges in that world that you find, or differences in those relationships that are unique? Or is it just so happens to be like those are just some people that you've
No,
worked
I
with?
mean there are definitely some challenges in that community as well too. I think it's the work ethic. The work hours are really grueling and daunting. The travel, like a lot of the people that I do see, I see both creatives and I see execs in the film industry, and it's the hours. Like they're working 16-hour days. They are they don't see their families for X amount of time. They have to travel to God knows where and be there for 6 months and not see their family. So I do see that a lot, and it's just the work hours and the work ethic as well too. It's you're always on the clock. You're always trying to push through before a deadline kind of thing, because in the film industry time equals money. So
Yeah, well, in every industry, but I think it's so. I worked in the film industry for a little bit, and I think what's interesting about it is that there's this assumption, uh, and this might even help when you're dealing with some clients, because I still have friends in the industry. There's this assumption that it's your dream job. So people are more willing to take advantage of you, because if you don't want to do it, there's 10,000 people lining up to take the job for free, at least for a couple years, right? Because there's so much passion into it, and there's a lot of abuse of that desire to succeed, and that's where the exploitation of the extra hours and stuff come in. Because look, there are other jobs where people work 12 and 14-hour days. I mean, there's a lot of lawyers who put in that kind of time, and they don't have the same kind of trauma, because there's an hourly rate that they're getting compensated for if they're putting the, whereas like with the film industry, people expect you to do all of it for free, or like just as that's just part of your job description, as well as a little bit of um kind of just for lack of a better word, there's a lot of kissing butt that you have to do, and kind of the politics in that world is very sensitive, and there's a lot of very high caliber egos. So it's interesting to see how people's like dreams are so it like in terms of the work ethic. And they had the problem with interns for the same reason years ago, where people were working for free, which was like totally illegal. And it's like, oh, then they had to put a stop to it.
I definitely see that. I see that there is sort of this ebb and flow with highs and lows. Like, you know, they'll get an audition or they'll get a part, you know, let's say it's an actor. And it's the high of like, oh my God, I got this role. This is incredible. And then 2 weeks later, it's this complete low. It's like, oh my God, what is my life? What's the next project? I don't know how I'm going to do this. Like, I don't know if I can financially sustain this. I just, you know, I have a 30-year mortgage that I can't pay. You know, so there's the highs and the lows of the industry that I also see a lot too.
And as far as infidelity in that community, it's so interesting because social media has changed so much of it. But I used to tell people about 9 years ago, that infidelity and kind of crossing certain boundaries that you're not communicating with your wife happens, or husband, happens for two reasons. One, you're not communicating, and then two, there's opportunity. So someone who like worked at home before all the apps came out and social media, there was less of a chance that there was going to be that infidelity. And housewives classically just weren't exposed, you know, to having. But in the film industry, everybody's beautiful and like you're traveling and you just have so much more opportunity for those kinds of things on both sexes. But I kind of feel like the social media apps have somewhat evened it out, even for people who are home all day. So maybe it's not as uncommon, you know, or maybe Hollywood doesn't have as much of a different edge anymore as like a normal kind of quote unquote normal job. Do you see more exploration and infidelity and issues in the film industry? Or do you feel like it's just kind of par across the board now, where people are dealing with the same, it's kind of democratized that issue across the board?
I think that there's going to be infidelity in every industry, but there is something about the film industry because it is like a family. You know, you're traveling with people for, let's say, 4 months at a time, and you get really close and you're staying at the same hotel. It's kind of like this vacation mentality. And also, if you are an actor and you're supposed to be playing that you fall in love with another actor, you know, there's so many, you know, cases that I have that, you know, they fall in love on set. They're married, they have children, and then they're supposed to fall in love with this person, you know, on set, and they actually do, you know. And then once they leave set, they're like, what the hell did I do? What kind of world was I just living in for 5 months, 4 months, whatever it is, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because they're good at their job, and they kind of get lost in the character and lost in the story of it all. I get that. I totally see that. So interesting. How does your background in trauma kind of feed into your practice?
Yeah. I mean, so let me give you some background as well too. I actually was an actor. I moved out to LA to be an actor, so I do have that background. And I was studying Strasberg, and they do this thing called basic relaxation. And through basic relaxation, you relax your whole body, you start moving it. And as I was moving my body and listening to what was happening in my body, memories would come up from when I was like 6 years old that I hadn't thought about in 20 plus years, whatever it is. And so I was really curious about that. And I ended up, you know, going to grad school, becoming a therapist. And I had a supervisor who was trained in both EMDR and brain spotting. And I was like, wow, this is like, you know, the key to the lock that I've been looking for the last 6 years. You know, this is what was happening in my body. So basically, the theory behind EMDR and brain spotting is that we store trauma in our bodies, and we have to sort of process it out through staring at a spot for brain spotting, or tapping, or eye movement. So it all plays into, I mean, we all have trauma, whether they're little t traumas or big T traumas. So it always plays in. And also traumas, you know, whether little t or big T, kind of always feed into the relationships as well too. If you have a mini trauma with your mom or your dad or your sibling, it's going to come up in your relationship. It always does.
Well, Danielle, thank you so much for all your wisdom and all your perspective. It was so interesting to talk to you. If you want to reach out to Danielle directly, she's at thefeelingspace.me. You can also find her on Instagram at The Feeling Space, or you can even email her directly at Danielle@thefeelingspace.me. Thank you so much for being with us. And I hope to talk to you again soon.
Awesome.
Please keep in touch.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate you.
If you're interested in learning how to get the absolute most out of your romantic relationships, then you're in luck, because I have put together a free workshop or masterclass, if you will, about 3 secrets that people in happy relationships have discovered. You can view the workshop at mrspirituality.com/3 secrets. Again, it's completely free. Just go there and watch it. It'll help you on your journey, give you some wisdom, some things to think about. The website again is mrspirituality.com/3 secrets. That's mrspirituality.com/3, the word secrets. It's all yours. Enjoy.